Thank it for letting you know, and let it go. And on the next breath, notice your thoughts. What are your thoughts doing right now? If they're racing around, try to focus on just one thought for a moment. Hear what it's saying. Breathe into it and thank it, and let it go. And now notice your emotions. How are you feeling? Any emotion is okay. Don't judge it. Just hear it, feel it, notice it. Breathe into it and then release. I will be taking you through a process where you will be hearing words and phrases that may bring up some discomfort or even some defensiveness. Instead of pushing those feelings away, I'm going to ask that you breathe into and allow whatever comes up for you, just like we did with our thoughts and our body and our emotions. Remember to breathe and allow those feelings and discomforts to surface without judgment. Take some time to listen to your inner thoughts. Really hear what they have to say. And if you aren't sure how to feel about some of the words and phrases that I will be sharing, I will repeat them after the meditation, and you'll be able to write them down and maybe even allow those to lead you to any questions you may have. Notice the stories you tell yourself about any of the following terms. I'm going to say a word, and then we're going to take a moment of silence, and then I'll say the next one, and continuing on. Breathe into your heart and release. The first word that we will think about is race. The next word is bias. Racism. Stereotype. Prejudice. Remember to breathe. Social justice. Ally. Privilege. Appropriation. 13th Amendment. Remember to breathe. Advocate. Culture. Notice your feelings. Notice your thoughts. Activist. DEI, also known as diversity, equity, and inclusion. Class or classism. Breathe into your heart. Ground your thoughts and your energies down into your feet. Oppression. Silencing. Accomplice. Saviorism. Fragility. Value. Justice. Breathe again into your heart. Notice if you have any thoughts racing or if your heart is racing. Notice what feelings are coming up. Is there tension anywhere in your body? If so, notice where it's located. Breathe deeply into those places with so much love and grace and gratitude and forgiveness. Are you willing to change the way you feel about some of those words? You're the only one that knows the answer. No one else is here to judge you. If the answer is yes, then thank yourself for being willing to consider change. If you don't feel ready, allow yourself to be curious about that. No judgment, just awareness. Breathing, allowing, feeling. We're going to take a few moments of silence. And in that silence, just allow yourself to let all of your thoughts surface. Take about one more minute. And take a deep breath. Feel your body. Another deep breath. Take in the sounds around you. One more deep breath. Recognize yourself as one with the universe, with God, Goddess, all that is, and with all of those people sitting in here tonight, and those who are connecting with us in other ways through prayer and energy. Be grateful, sending all this gratitude and this love out into the universe, releasing all attachment. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And when you feel ready, open your eyes. I know we didn't go as long a meditation as I know some of you are used to. We want to try and cover quite a few things this evening. And so one of those is going to include writing down questions that you might have about some of the words that came up during that meditation. I will be sharing more of those words again. I'm going to be sharing them again as you reach in front of you and maybe grab one of the notebooks and one of the pens. And just give yourself a moment in just a little while. We're going to do that. Let's not start writing the questions right away because I just want to introduce my friends up here. For one thing, those of you who came in late, my name is Terra Bundance, and it has become a calling of mine to have conversations about social justice, racial equality. It's been something that I've been, not just racial equality, LGBTQ, all equality. It's been something that I've been called to, studied, practiced, and didn't know that I would be sitting in front of a group of people in a situation such as this until very recently when the universe kind of kicked me in the behind and said, yes, it's time. And so I just want to thank you for holding space with all of us, because this conversation is often one of the hardest conversations for us to have, which is why we still have so much turmoil around these conversations. So I have my friend Nicole here sitting next to me, and my beloved Michael. And they're up here to kind of help out with handing out papers and taking up some of your questions, and maybe even handing the microphone over to people who might want to respond to some of the questions that come up. So a few things I'm just going to ask for. I'm going to make sure that everybody has paper if you want it. We're also going to be handing out these checklists. And so, Michael, if you don't mind grabbing that one, and then Nicole, if you can do this. So these checklists are, let's see, I've got my notes. Let's see. Our goal for this checklist is that we are going to be creating, this is, right now we're a group based on a book that one of our dear friends brought to us, and a group of people called Be the Bridge. And so this book and gather group met for 10 weeks, and we talked about what it means to be a bridge, especially within a spiritual community. And we wanted to continue having this conversation once we completed that course. And so several of us have continued the conversation, and our goal is to be doing more of that in the coming year. We want to be able to bring people together to watch movies together, to read books together, to there's all the things that are on this checklist. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is check off anything that you would like to see happen in this community. And then if you feel like being a part of this conversation at a deeper level, maybe being part of the starter group, put your name and maybe email or phone number, whatever feels comfortable to you, on the back of that checklist, so that when we receive it, we can add it to our list, and we'll contact you when we start doing more gatherings for this. So yeah, if you can go ahead and pass out those and then let's see. So you can take your time to answer, check the things on the checklist, and we're going to have you put that in this basket right up here before you leave, or we'll pick them up throughout the evening. We're also going to have you write your questions down, and if your questions are short, just tear them off the piece of paper and also stick them in this basket. We'll pass the basket around. So while while those are getting passed out, I am going to remind you of some of the words that came up during the meditation. So when I start reading these words again, I'm going to read them a little more quickly than I did in the meditation. And if any of the words stand out to you, like, I don't know what that means, write it down and just say, what does this mean? And use that as one of your questions. Or I'd like to know more about that phrase or that word. Or if you have an opinion or a thought about that word, write down your question. And the goal here is that we're going to be having a conversation, so I'm not going to be answering the questions. It's not a Ask Terra evening, because I don't have all the answers. That's why I'm here, is to learn, just like everyone else. And so we're all just going to be kind of raising our hands whenever we read these questions off. I'm going to have everyone raise their hand instead of speaking out, because I want to make sure that everyone gets heard and that one or two people don't end up answering all the questions or having all the responses. The whole point is that we are really trying to create a space for equality, and I want everyone to feel heard. So, all right, here we go. Yes? Oh, he didn't get one. Thank you. Did everyone get one? Yes, okay. So think about these words, think about what they bring up for you. If you have any questions, just write down the word and your question as we go through this list. Race. Bias. Racism. Stereotype. Prejudice. Social justice. ally, privilege, appropriation, 13th Amendment, advocate, culture, activist, DEI, class, oppression, silencing, silencing, accomplice, saviorism. I added a word that's not on my list and I forgot what it was. It just popped into my head when I was doing the meditation and I forgot what it was. So I apologize. If anyone happens to remember, the last word I have here is justice. I know there was one other word before that one, and it's not coming back to me. Okay, so if you have a question that you've already written down, we've got this basket right here. I'm going to have Michael walk around and just raise your hand if you've got a question that you've written down and you'd like to put in the basket. And in the meantime, I don't know what to do. Yes.
Okay, I'll start over. I love Michael's poetry. Another poet I love is Rumi. He wrote in the 1200s. And a phrase from one of his poems applies to all these words, even in 2024. Out beyond all the right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I will meet you there.
It's one of my favorites. Thank you for sharing that. That's what we're doing right now, right? We're meeting each other. We're meeting each other in the field right now. That's really helpful. Thank you for that. Behind you, Michael. We have quite a few questions. This makes me very happy and very excited. Once Michael gets back here, we're going to have, there's one in the very back as well, Michael, straight back. We may not get to all the questions. It looks like we had quite a few. And what we're going to be doing is saving whatever questions we don't get to this evening, we're going to be saving them for future conversations. So please know that your questions are not going to be forgotten. So, would you like your mic back? Okay. Yeah, I want you to read the questions.
Okay,
I think it's on. It's just not as loud.
is it on? Okay. So the first question that was handed in that I see is, please say more about appropriation, as in cultural appropriation. Who has something to say about appropriation?
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to open it up to the group to answer. I mean, I've got tons of answers and my own perspectives, but I don't want mine to be the only voice. So, what does somebody know about appropriation? What does appropriation mean to you? Yes, I will say yes. The answer is partially cultural appropriation, correct. Appropriation really means more than culture. It could be anything that you've taken from someone else and used as your own and not, given them credit where the credit was due. So, anybody else have any other thoughts about appropriation? No? Yeah, yeah.
In a way, I mean, there's good and bad in appropriation if it's done correctly with the right giving of, for example, Elvis Presley appropriated a lot of the rhythm and blues songs of the 50s, and he gave props right back to that community, including B.B. King, who became a very good friend of his. And he actually opened up doors for B.B. King that he would have never had he not appropriated that genre. And I don't think anybody, in fact, I've heard a lot of the people in the African community also liked him at the time, even though he's kind of blasé today, but back in the 50s, he was pretty big. But that's just a thought.
All right, so who has a thought about what was just spoken? Because I have a perspective and an opinion that's a little bit different from that while I hear it.
It's a kind of love in the sense that it's appreciation for something that's from another culture, but it's also a kind of unconscious theft.
Yes, thank you.
When I think of appropriation, I think of the fact that we sometimes think that we are responsible. We sometimes think that we are responsible for the good things that happen in our life, and we will take credit for having a good skill or a good, blessing, gift or whatever, when all things come from God. Even the things that we have on an everyday basis, we have a tendency to want to give ourselves credit for that and not know that with all things are only possible through him.
I really like that perspective. I've never actually thought of it that way before. You just kind of sparked something in me. So basically, we're all God appropriating, right? We're all appropriating God. So to some degree, this is a deeper conversation than I anticipated. I really like that. So one thing I will say, just kind of based on something that you were saying about Elvis, I just want to mention that Elvis did not always give credit where credit was due. And so, unfortunately, we hear about some of the times that he did, but we don't hear about all the times that he didn't. And not just Elvis. I mean, there's many. Eric Clapton, Led Zeppelin, they were appropriating a lot back then. And a lot of times a voice that was not as well heard, such as a black voice or a Native American voice, something would be appropriated from their culture directly, whether it was a line, a phrase, a song, specific thing. And not always credit was given where it was taken from. And unfortunately, that is what kind of appropriation does in a very negative sense. And so we want to really remember and consider that while some appropriation can be good, especially if credit is given, appropriation is really stealing. It's taking. And unless you're given permission before you use something, it's considered appropriation. And so really, like, appropriation as a word isn't necessarily a great word. Borrowing with permission, totally, really different conversation. So, all right, we had a question back here.
Testing.
Yes.
Just, I came across this word a lot when I was reading about the treatment of the Jews in Germany in the 1930s, where they expropriated properties. I'd like to have that word explained.
I don't have an answer for that at this moment, but it is one. Michael, do you have a thought? Yeah. No? Anybody else have because that's one that I'm not as familiar with that term.
Okay, so we'll add that to our questions.
Yeah, expropriation.
I've got more questions here if we're ready to
let's go ahead and jump into
Go to the
another
next one.
question.
This one's right on. Why is it important to have these dialogues at this church?
Ooh, that's the question, right? That's the question. Why is it important? We're called unity. I mean, that's the answer, right? Yes.
Well, I see it as to help bring widening thought and widening realization to those like Aaron Clapton and Elvis that they did not have an awareness at the time, a cultural awareness of what it was they were doing. And by having these conversations, I feel as though we are widening and delving into and expanding on that awareness.
I love that. Would you like to let people know why you brought the book to us in the first place?
I felt that this being unity, that this was the most appropriate place to bring Be the Bridge and Latasha Morrison's, thought. And it dealt with the church, American Christianity, dealing with why it permeated, racism, even though, there was this base, America's based on belief in God and Christianity. And I just felt that we at Unity, if no one else, should be the one to look into this and foster. And I'm so glad that you, Michael, and Nicole,
And many
are
others,
involved,
Rebecca, and yeah,
and I will support you in any way I can.
thank you.
So it is.
Thank you, thank you. All right.
Just want to say I do see it differently than you. And the thing I just wanted to add to what I think is I think Elvis at the time that happened, and I was alive when he first came out, I remember the white community was very unaware, except at a distance of the black community, of the black music and so forth. And Elvis came in as a bridge between those two cultures that was never there before. And that was one of the things that made him so popular. And I know that when he was on there, I don't think he consciously ever thought of himself stealing from them because he actually attended church when he was a young boy in black churches and felt very connected with them. So I just think that there was situations where you have appropriations, which is literally a bridge, what we're talking about today, that came between two cultures.
Okay.
It seems to me that what's being described is the difference between appropriation and influencing. And that's such a fine line and so many variables involved. It's hard to discern between the two.
That's a good conversation. I mean, this is why we're having this conversation.
Regarding the
I think so.
hello, testing. Okay.
Yes. Put it in your mouth though, like basically. Yeah.
Regarding your question about, can you hear it? About why does it matter if we have these conversations? Kind of goes back to like what Richard was saying on Sunday. Because I've had thoughts of that, like, why does it matter if I vote? Why does it matter if I stand up to this person? I'm just one person. But it matters because, like, yes, I'm one person, but I also come into contact with hundreds of people a day. And those people have contact with 100 other people. And what he was saying, I don't remember exactly how he worded it, but he said something like, it permeated across, like, oceans, the same thought. And I really do believe that we have a butterfly effect because we're all one, So what's good for the one is good for the whole.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, this one's very quiet.
Very quiet.
It's hard. Did you hear what she was saying? Oh, I'm sorry. Here, use this. Can you say it
Okay.
again? Would you mind saying it again?
Yes, I can say it
Just
again.
turn this one off.
I was thinking about Richard's sermon on Sunday, and I was thinking about, well, why does it matter if I vote or if I stand up for an individual? Why does it matter if I do anything? Because I'm just one person. But essentially what I said is I come into contact with 100 people. Those people come into contact with 100 other people. And I think, Richard, you said something about it permeating across like an ocean, or a thought went to another continent. So I think what we do matters because it has a butterfly effect on the rest of the world. And really, ultimately, there's only one person here. So if one person has that thought, we kind of all have that thought as well. Yeah, I hope I summed that up. Good.
Yes, that was great.
So I'm not sure exactly what the word appropriation means, but I do know artists borrow from other cultures all the time.
Yeah, they can't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not sure what the word appropriation means, but I do know artists borrow and steal basically from other artists all the time. Russian impressionist music borrows from the Russian folk music. African music is also, more modern African music borrows from the traditions of Bach even. So in artistic terms, I don't know, I'm really not sure what you mean by appropriation. But I do know that when cultures collaborate and they borrow from each other, amazing, wonderful things happen. And I'm also really kind of taken by Richard Serban last Sunday when he talked about the one monkey who was taught how to wash the potatoes, who and what's really bizarre is that one lesson was somehow transmitted even without other monkeys transmitting it to other islands.
Yeah.
But it's almost as though sometimes things occur spontaneously without connection. But I know we have to appreciate other cultures, and it's not always easy because sometimes we feel threatened by other cultures and other. So tolerance is pretty gosh darn important at times, and appreciation too. So.
I love that.
I know Mike, your husband, is really into African music too, so that's.
Well, I'm going to actually read the definition of cultural appropriation since there's been a little bit of, not necessarily conflict, but difference of opinion. Cultural appropriation is the act of members of a dominant, powerful, privileged group claiming ownership or the rights to less powerful privileged groups' culture and or religious symbols, dress, and ceremony. And so where music comes in, I mean, it's hard. Just like two of us have said, it's music can cross barriers, right? Music is something that is universal. It's found in every tribal community from the beginning of time. Music is created, and so there's no chords that have never been played, but they've not all the chords have been played in exactly the right way, exactly the same way that someone might put together a song. And so the main thing about cultural appropriation is when a specific thing is taken and then claimed as or owned by someone who is of a dominant class or group. And so when we look at that, we can really kind of see the space. There is a bit of a gap because if someone takes a song like Led Zeppelin has been taken to court for songs that were stolen by Black blues men, and then they thought they could get away with it, and they didn't. They were taken to court and had to pay fees and fines. So, that's a little more of a conversation, maybe that helps to parse the space.
I just wanted to speak on the question of why have the discussions of this church. It's because of the influence that you have out in the communities, and knowing and taking the message out into the communities, into the world, will make a huge difference. And I am so proud of all of you, of this church, for taking this step. Thank you.
I'm emotional. That means a lot to me. and I know to all of us who are ready to have more of this conversation. You want to read another one?
Sure. Please explain about silencing. Um, the example was assassination of Martin Luther King. What other kind of forms of silencing can we identify in the community and the world at large?
The Me Too movement.
Me Too movement?
Yeah, that's what comes.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, the Me Too movement. Is there anything more you'd like to say about that? How silencing applies to that? It's a deep one. There's a lot there. Maybe we can let that rest for now, but we can all maybe think about that some more. Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this tonight. Just what I had written down on my pad a while back before somebody mentioned the word, question about silencing was a quote from Martin Luther King that I've been thinking about a lot and trying to process. Just part of the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition is the appalling silence of the good people. Yeah, if anybody wants to comment on that, I'd love to hear anybody's comments.
Well, and I'd like to at least just dive in because there's a couple of other people that also felt that. But I mean, doesn't that kind of answer the last question? Why unity? Because it's been silent. We've been silent for too long. For too long.
The silencing part is causing people to have fear to share their thoughts about what's going on. And, you know, coming in, I was on the internet and I saw this guy who was telling his neighbors that they were making his neighborhood bad, that they were having a repast in their yard, and he was like, you guys, I don't like you guys are ruining my neighborhood, you're parking in front of my driveway. And he was like, they were saying, well, we just had a death. And he was like, I don't care, I just want you guys to move your cars, and you look like a gang. And so my daughter, thank God, she reminded me. I said, oh, that just makes and she goes, Mom, but you got to realize that goes both ways. Yeah. And I was like, she, like, you came up in the 50s. She's like, but when you sent me to school, I was the only black kid in my class. So I have a totally different outlook on things than you do, and so, and I'm so glad sometimes that I sent her. So me, I'm sure other people's kids, if you were come from the 50s, you have a different mindset. And so the younger people give you a more of a insight into things. Yeah.
As someone who utilizes social media a lot, it's something that I observe all the time. And on one site, I'm a moderator, community reviewer, and what I see over and over again is perhaps the strongest form of silencing is labeling. Oh, you're a liberal, that means you're this. You're a conservative, that means you're this. You come from a certain cultural background, that means you must be. I see all types of ways that we try to silence each other and just put blocks up so that we don't have to hear what someone else has to say and what their experience is.
When Tara was in first grade, second grade, and our son was in first grade, I was driving through Woodstock one day, and there were some nice-looking young people passing out flyers to the cars that were driving through. And I smiled and opened my window for them to hand me one of the flyers. And it turned out it was the Ku Klux Klan. And I was so stunned, I threw the paper back at him and I said, "Get out of my town." And I was so angry. I went home and called the NAACP, and the woman I talked to said, "Do you have children in school?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Honey, you better not do anything because they'll go after them." And for the first time, I was silenced out of fear. And every time I hear the word silence, that's what comes to me. And now I can be brave because my kids aren't in school anymore.
And we're fighting the same fight.
Yeah.
I wanted to approach silencing from another standpoint, and that's more in the realm of mass silencing, or perhaps you could call it suppression, specifically the suppression of black history in many areas. I'm ashamed to say that it was a relatively few years ago when I heard about the Tulsa race massacre in 1919. I even lived in Oklahoma for a while. Nobody ever brought it up. And that was one of the most egregious occurrences, you know, right up there with the 1906 Atlanta race riot, of deliberately taking one small alleged incident and using that as an excuse as an indiscriminate massacre. I was already aware of it, but I read another story about Tulsa that in the years following that, it was just buried. There were no annual acknowledgments of anything like that. The Tulsa police chief finally apologized. You know when that apology came? 2013. It took almost 100 years. And there have just been a number of those cases where the city fathers of a city gloss over things and silence protest. Henry Grady spoke to a businessmen's association in New York in 1885 and basically glossed over the entire race question. Our black folks are happy. We've had no problem with any of them being attacked, and just, you know. And of course, when you're in this high-toned business sort of environment, people are going to go, and everybody looks like you, everybody's white and rich, you're going to tend to agree with them. So to me, there are, and I could go on all night, but there are just hundreds of examples, I'm sure, of things that have occurred like that. And to me, that's, if I get the definition right, that's the
mass.
definition, mass silencing,
Yep.
basically.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so it is.
Yeah, thank you. We have one back here, and then I don't think that microphone's very good, Michael. Nope, that's the quiet one. Here, it's okay. And then we have one. No, you go ahead.
I read a book a number of years ago. I thought it would be juicy to read. It was called Interracial Intimacies. But it turned out to be nothing but court cases against white people for breaking the law against black people. And I was just astounded particularly when it came to rape and the history of black men being lynched and for even looking at a white woman the wrong way. But what was astounding was for every one black man that raped a white woman, 10 white men raped a black woman. I mean, the disparity is just, it's astounding. And there is no record of any white man being prosecuted up until the 60s. Not one. And I mean, it's like, why, you know, I don't understand why there's not riots in the streets because of that injustice.
Cultural silencing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
What I wanted to say was that we've been, I think, conditioned to not to go. What's the expression? Go along to get along. To not talk about politics because somebody might get excited. To not talk about race, same reason, and we become victims. Right, and this past weekend, this was a political thing, but I was out in another state, met this woman who had held a sign up like on a corner. It was a political sign, and this guy, scary guy, came up to her and started harassing her and calling her a fascist and everything. And she turned her phone on and started to video him. She turned the whole dynamic around. I mean, he was getting ready to follow her to her car. And I mean, the police praised her and told her some other things she should do. I think we have to like lose that victim mentality. I mean, that's a strong feeling on my part.
Can we all just take a moment and take a deep breath? As one, and a breath out as one. We all just took that breath together. We're all sitting in this room together. So can we feel a little bit of the shaky energy that's coming up for all of us? It's a lot. This conversation is a lot. And we are scratching the surface by just asking a few questions and having a few people respond. Like, this is a small group here, you know? I think that this is so beautiful that we're willing. So everyone just like look to your left and right and just say, thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to say to every single one of you, thank you for being here. I forget, Richard, what time we are usually complete. Okay, great. So we still have time. We can ask some more questions. I just wanted to do a little check-in, make sure how's everybody doing? We okay? All right, let's keep doing this.
The next question I have is social justice. What is the goal or the intention of social justice?
It's a good conversation. That's a good question. So I'm going to share. I'm not going to, like, whoever wants to ask answer or respond to that, I do want to share something that I downloaded on my phone, which is what I keep picking up whenever somebody asks a question. It's called the ABCs of Social Justice. If you put that in your phone, a PDF will come up. And definitions to all of these phrases and more. I mean, I only picked 20. There's about, I don't know, probably 60 or more in here. But I actually can give you kind of a definition of social justice. But in the meantime, while I'm looking for it, does anybody want to respond to that? Can you read it one more time, Michael?
What's the goal or intention of social justice?
What comes to me is the idea of equity, that we all come from a different place, but let's all give that everybody has the opportunity. It's not equality, but equity.
Equity is one of my favorite words. Like you said, not equality, equity. We all matter. We all deserve to have a voice.
One thing I wanted to bring up in regards to social justice, one of the Sunday school classes I took not long ago, we read a book by Brian Stevenson, who's a social justice attorney. I would highly recommend reading it. It's called Just Mercy, and I think they actually turned that into a movie.
They did.
But he's a phenomenal person, and he goes around and does talks as well. But the book is very well worth reading.
Thank you for bringing that up. We love Brian Stevenson in our house. I'm just going to read the definition, and then if anybody else wants to respond to this. Social justice is the practice of allyship and coalition work in order to promote equality, equity, respect, and the assurance of rights within and between communities and social groups. That's a mouthful, but it's weighted, right? So it's a big word. Why social justice? I mean, why not social justice, right? We have not been living a life of social justice until very recently having this conversation.
What is the 13th Amendment?
Ooh, 13th Amendment. So
It abolished slavery to start with, but then there was some language in it that allowed things like Jim Crow to come along because of the way it was written. There's an amazing movie called 13th that's on Netflix. It just gives the whole history. But that was the amendment that abolished slavery. That was the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Yeah, good questions. And if you haven't, I mean, if you look at your checkbox, one of the things that we have on this list is to watch movies. And that would be one of the movies that we would suggest possibly watching together as a group, 13th. And if you want to see it before then, we can all watch it together again, but I definitely recommend that movie. It woke some things up in me that I was unaware of. You know. If you want to, especially if you want to be a part of the future conversation, the gatherings, the groups, the meetings, yeah, put your name and email and or phone number on the back of the checklist, and I'm going to be collecting all of them because I will be looking at all the questions, all the checks, and see which ones come up the most. You're welcome. Thank you. Hmm. Here's another question. Yeah, thank you.
Do you want me to do another question?
Sure. Let's go for another one.
What's the difference between bias and prejudice?
Prejudice is when you prejudge someone. You don't know them, but you prejudge them. And bias is what most of us are. We are biased towards those that we understand. What we don't understand, we can't side with. But when we side with those that we are biased towards.
That's good. And I'll add to that. Basically, bias is kind of not knowing what we don't know. We don't know that we're biased unless we start thinking, wow, I seem to have the same issue over and over again with this particular group, and I really don't know why. And it may be because of how you were brought up. You might have a social class that's higher than a lot of others, and you may look down your nose at people who don't have shoes for their kids, or they wear clothes from the thrift store, and you don't realize that that's a bias until you start recognizing, wow, I'm doing this a lot. And so one of the questions we've been asking in our conversation and in our small group that we've had is kind of checking your bias, like really thinking about it throughout the week, and notice where you have just not really like an ugly judgment, but just a thought like, ugh, I hate that person wore this blah, 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 or that this person, and think, why am I feeling that way right now? And it could be bias. Now, prejudice, just like you were saying, is prejudging. It's based on a dislike, a distaste for a certain type of person. And so it's kind of like it's more insidious. It's more anger filled, and it's usually going to come with some racist thoughts. Who else wants to add anything to that? Yeah.
I remember doing a paper where it talked about the difference between bias, prejudice, and race. I remember doing a paper when I was in college regarding bias, prejudice, and racism, and what was the difference. And what I learned then, and funny again, my daughter was telling me today, Mom, that's changed, because what we learned then was minorities couldn't be prejudiced because prejudice comes from a power base. So there's always power behind racism. So if you don't have power, you can't be racist, but you can be very biased and prejudiced. Yes.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. Thank you for clearing that, because that's the question really, is prejudice, bias, and racism, like what's the difference? here's your homework. Should you assume to try this, is look up the definitions of those words. Get a little closer to them and consider where you may have some bias or where you may have some prejudice or where you may even have some cultural racism. Whether you consider yourself racist or not, we are all, especially the white folks in this room, we're all given privileges that are not given to to many people who don't look like us. And so whether we consider ourselves racist or not, we may be culturally have some of that without knowing it.
If I'm watching CNN or Fox News, and let's say they're pushing a narrative or an agenda, is that bias?
Who would like to answer that question? But is it based on a bias? Because news sells, right? They know their market.
I would say I'm more thinking of, is the person that is broadcasting the news broadcasting with their own interpretation and filter, which is a bias that you are receiving?
If we watch a lot of news clips, you'll see that the same news is given to multiple news anchors, and they all say a lot of the same exact word-for-word things. Based on how they deliver it, could be biased. Because, go ahead. No.
Well, that's not just the news. That can be in any media that you consume or any conversation you have. Everybody is interpreting things through their own filter of their life experience.
Yes. Yeah, the bias comes from our filters. Wherever your filters are from your life experience, that's what causes general bias. So we have, he said between 8:15 and 8:30, so we probably have about. Do y'all want to stick around for maybe one or two more questions, and then we can end with a beautiful poem from another? Yeah, let's do one or two more questions.
So this question is, equity, the word equity, is part of DEI because, so what's the role of equity in DEI? Is there anybody in the room that's familiar, like really familiar, they teach it or they've learned DEI as part of what they do, their job, or? Okay. Because it's a abbreviation that gets kicked around a lot on social media, along with CRT, critical race theory. And I see them get conflated all the time. People think it's the same thing. So where I see DEI showing up as part of school curriculum, or at least where it's commented upon more. And anybody else have experience with DEI as part of school or continuing education curriculum? Interesting. Sounds like there's some education.
This is good because for one thing, we have a lovely, wonderful teacher that most of us know about in this church who teaches DEI, and that's Danielle. I'm like blanking on her name. Danielle, and she teaches that. That's one of the things she teaches. So if anybody ever has a question about DEI, she's your gal. So I'm just going to read the definition of equity. The situation in which all people or groups are given access to the correct number and types of resources for them so as to achieve equal results. Differs from equality, which focuses on the equal distribution of resources rather than equal results. Yeah, big difference. So why equity in DEI is exactly that. Diversity, equity, inclusion. That's a longer conversation for sure, and one that we can probably dive into more. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't mind writing that down, helping me remember, because maybe we do a whole conversation on that, and we bring in Danielle and ask her to help us learn more. Yeah, right? Yay! Love that idea. How about another question?
So I'm going to read this in exactly the form that it was written. Why is it important these conversations are led by Caucasian people?
Oh, that's my favorite question. Who knows the answer to that besides people who have taken Be the Bridge, or had this conversation at a deeper level? Who wants to attempt an answer at that question? No. No. Okay, this is my favorite. That gave me chills from head to toe. Who had a thought? Read it one more time.
Why is it important that these conversations are led by Caucasian people?
– 100%. Would you like to answer? Are you sure?
It goes back to what we just talked about. Racism comes from a power base. I can go to several jobs on the same block and be turned down because the color of my skin. The chance of that happening to you is little to none. So that's the power base behind racism. And so the more whites that talk about it, the more it gets amongst those who have the power. That's right.
And the simplest answer to that question, to add to what was just shared, is that white people listen to white people, and black people are tired of answering our questions. They're tired of answering our questions. They're not a monolith. One black person is not going to answer your black question or your curiosity for the entire race of black people. And so white people are supposed to be having this conversation with each other so that we can dig it up and find the answers together. And then we create a safe environment for people of color to join in this conversation, because otherwise that conversation is not being had. And so if I'm willing to stand up and start this conversation and bring up this conversation and be a part of this conversation, I'm a safe place for white people to come ask me some questions, so they're not going to their one black friend and saying, why is this thing why is this a thing? And the black person goes, I'm so tired of answering that question. And it's really not theirs to answer. It's ours to figure out, because we helped perpetuate, we, being white people, have helped perpetuate the reason that this is still a question. So it's a really good question. No, it's okay. Actually, let me go over here.
I'm in the group with Danielle, and she last night was wonderful. I thought she was going to be here. But the week before, she was out, and Deborah, and I'm speaking about her now, asked a question in the group that she would not have asked if Daniel had been there. And so you just answered the question right there, because it was like she didn't want to make Danielle feel uncomfortable by asking the question. But we adore her. I mean, she's wonderful.
I mean, sometimes there's that. And the thing is, if I'm a white person in a group of white people and they ask a question that they might be either uncomfortable or don't know who to ask, we're going to dig. We're going to dig. And I'm going to say, that's me too. I do that as well, or I've done that in the past. And I'm not going to make it judgmental. I'm going to have a conversation to deepen that, to continue that conversation with you. Yeah, we had one more.
I was going to say, isn't it kind of white people's responsibility to take accountability for some of the, you're talking about biases. It's kind of our responsibility to have this conversation. It's not anyone else's, because we're the one with the privilege, I guess.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we're the ones with the privilege.
The way I see it, and I'm going to be bold here, I'm going to say that until we teach black history and the history of other minorities and include that in our school system, this indifference is just going to be perpetuated. It will never, it'll never stop.
Chet's got a question, and then we'll come to you after.
Just really quickly, to segue off what he just said, I'm a child who grew up in the 60s, and our history never talked about the atrocities to the Native Americans. They glossed over who America was founded by and all of that. So when you talk about education, I think we need to get truthful about the history when we teach our children.
Chet?
Yeah, I just want to say that the purpose of Be the Bridge classes is to get the exchange and to have white people answering the questions, but black people or people of color hearing those, and the exchange is what is important. I think in a vacuum, I think that it doesn't serve as well. That's why there is always a white leader and a black leader in a group. And there are multiple, people of color in the group. And that's what creates the best type of conversation, because it's important that that white people, Caucasians, answer these questions, but it's also important that black people hear their answers and understand where they're coming from, so they can then respond accordingly, so that there's a entirety of response to questions. Anyway, that's the purpose of Be the Bridge.
We have one right here.
Oh, I was just gonna say, growing up in the '90s in northern New York, like as my mom stated, um, I went to predominantly Caucasian schools. I went to predominantly Caucasian schools where I was either the only black kid in my school or the grade or my class. When history was taught, there was nothing that was spoken about any achievements or anything that black people added to America. It was just basically taught from like I didn't know until I was like in the 5th grade about slavery. My parents never told me about slavery or anything like that. But so it was like a real shock to me because I never knew that happened, you know. And it was like, wow. And then I just remember, you know, when the kids were educated about it, that's all they would say is like, your people were slaves. And, it was just like, wow, it just made me feel like lesser than everybody else. And I didn't have that complex before that happened. I felt equal to everyone until that happened. So I just wanted to share that experience from that viewpoint.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so you see the downfall of not sharing, having this conversation more.
I just want to say I'm very encouraged with how frequently I'm hearing the concept of narrative being brought up. It helps our culture, I think, understand more and more that our stories aren't necessarily true. And I'm hearing this discussion from a broader context of believing and appreciating that over the last 5,000 years, every one of us is the recipient of cultural, of the trauma that comes from either being an oppressor or the oppressed, and that the oppressor always seizes the narrative. There's a lot of hope, for me at least, in gaining the skills to teach people to back off their rigid idea of who they think they are, and be open to other stories in a way that is sensitive to going over and over the riffs of being the one who's in control and the one who dominates versus the one who is silenced and the one who doesn't even know how to say what their story is because they've been so shut down by the trauma of it all.
I think we have one more, and then we are going to bring it to a close. Please be sure, before I finish this with this last response, be sure that you shared any questions and put them in the basket, but also your checklist. Make sure that you leave that in the basket. We'll probably move that to the back of the room and just drop your checklist in there so that we can be sure what we can create together moving forward.
People were talking about the history, and there's a book called People's History of the United States. And trust me, it's difficult. I found it very difficult to read, but it tells you the story from the other points of view.
By Howard Zinn. Yep. We have a child's version of that for my son when he's ready to dig a little deeper. Yeah, it's a great one. Thank you. Thank you. That's right. We're humanizing each other. That is correct. Would you like to? So we're going to end. Benita's going to share a poem that I'm going to use this one is very appropriate end. So let's just use this as our prayer out. And so just kind of get into your heart and listen, please.
So I'm a nurse midwife, that's the context, and I wrote this poem about ending racism because it's deadly, but my focus was mostly on improving the rates of Black mothers and their babies living in the United States because they're dying at 3 times the rates than whites. And racism is the root cause. Nature adores variety. Flowers bloom in such an array. Humans, black, brown, caramel, yellow, red, and white. Some freckled like me. Can you only see the outside? Various reactions to this color or that. Be aware of our old programming. It serves none. Can you look deeper? We are all just people, created different but equal. We all bleed red.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. We will continue having this conversation now that I see that this is a conversation we all want to have. It brings me great joy. Thank you, Richard, for giving us the space to do this evening. We love you all. Have a blessed night. Thank you.